Welcome back. Today, we're jumping right into an explainer that completely reframes how we look at a massive 1,000-year artistic journey. We're going to explore the evolution of medieval art, specifically tracing its incredible path from the profound silence of the early Middle Ages all the way to the dawn of the Renaissance. You know, for the longest time, we've been taught that after the Roman Empire fell, Europe basically just hit the pause button. But is that really true? We're going to shatter the myth of the Dark Ages right now and reveal a story that is dynamic, deeply evolutionary, and full of engineering brilliance and the eventual reawakening of the human spirit. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll trace this chronological journey starting around 500 AD with the monastic era, then move to the Romanesque awakening in 1000 AD, hit the soaring Gothic climax in the 12th century, and finally wrap up at the dawn of the Renaissance in the 14th century. Let's get into it. Part 1. Arts conceived in silence, 500 AD and the monastic retreat. Picture this. The Western Roman Empire collapses, and Europe is thrust into absolute chaos. The systems that kept order are just gone. Cities are damaged, trade routes are paralyzed, and a heavy, profound silence falls over the entire continent. But out on these isolated, rocky Irish coasts, monks were quietly keeping the flame of human knowledge alive. They created illuminated manuscripts, taking ancient Christian theology and brilliantly merging it with indigenous, Germanic, and cultic abstract animal motifs. It's literally an archaeological turning point, preserved right there on pages of vellum, which is prepared animal skin. Now, think about the microscopic, grueling labor this actually required. These monks couldn't just pop down to the art store. They painstakingly crafted these vibrant pigments by literally crushing real precious gems and insects directly over the vellum. Talk about dedication, right? It was this quiet, profound act of devotion that kept culture breathing during a very dark, very isolated era. Moving on to Part 2, Romanesque, God's Massive Fortress, the Awakening of 1000 AD. Fast forward to the year 1000. Feudalism stabilizes, agriculture takes off, and a unified European architectural vision suddenly explodes onto the scene. And this wasn't just about throwing up a building. They were literally constructing an impenetrable fortress for God to hold back a world that was still pretty terrifying. They took the old Roman basilica floor plan, slapped a cross-shaped transept on it, and built these massive, thick stone walls with heavy round arches and giant dull pillars. It was all about creating a secure, unshakable foundation to protect people from a chaotic reality. But how do you preach to a population where almost nobody can read? Well, you use highly graphic stone reliefs. Right above the church entrances, a spot called the tympanum, they carved these wild, terrifying visual sermons of the Last Judgment. Imagine walking up to church and being hit with this explosive contrast of the righteous rejoicing while sinners are literally being dragged down to hell by demons. It was designed to command absolute awe, and yeah, a healthy dose of fear too. Now, a lot of us look at medieval art with its flat, kind of distorted bodies and think, wow, they just didn't know how to draw. But actually, scratch that, that's completely missing the point. The distortion was entirely intentional. It was a very deliberate theological tool. The whole idea was to diminish human pride and show just how empty and vain the physical world was compared to the overwhelming, awe-inspiring power of the divine. All right, Part 3, civilizational exchange beyond borders, because Europe was never truly alone. There's this massive misconception that medieval Europe was just an isolated, closed-off bubble operating in a vacuum. Not true at all. Diverse global inputs were heavily enriching Christian art. Looking east, the Byzantine Empire brought us those stunning gold mosaics and massive domes. Down in the Iberian Peninsula, the incredibly intricate arabesque patterns and geometric brilliance of Islamic architecture deeply influenced Christian aesthetics. And up north, the Vikings lent their advanced shipbuilding tech and fierce dragon motifs to create those wildly unique wooden stave churches. It's like a giant puzzle of cross-cultural exchange. Which brings us to Part 4, Gothic, aspiration toward light, the 12th century climax. By the mid-12th century, we hit this dazzling climax. We leave the heavy, dark fortresses of the Romanesque period behind and step into something completely new, soaring and luminous. It was an architectural revolution driven largely by a philosophy for Abbot Suger. His core idea was simple but game-changing. God is light. He believed the physical church had to directly reflect the divine. So, if God is light, the building needed to literally capture and be flooded with light. But to actually capture that light, they had to figure out how to ditch those massively thick stone walls.
They pulled this off with three major structural breakthroughs. Number one, the pointed arch, which pushed the crushing weight of the stone straight down much more efficiently. Number two, the ribbed vaults to reinforce the ceiling intersections. And number three, the absolute game changer, the flying buttress. This supported the massive walls from the outside. Suddenly, the walls themselves weren't holding the whole building up anymore.
So when you compare the two, it is literally night and day. On one side, Romanesque, thick walls, heavy round arches, dark, defensive fortress spaces for survival. On the other side, Gothic, paper-thin walls, soaring pointed arches, and spaces completely flooded with radiant light. They were quite literally defying gravity. Stepping into one of these Gothic cathedrals was meant to be an absolute sensory overload. Since the walls didn't need to support the roof, they swapped out the stone for massive panels of red and blue mineral stained glass. Places like Sainte-Chapelle or Chartres were built to give everyday people the illusion of standing in a heavenly Jerusalem on earth. Add in altarpieces dripping with gold leaf, plus silver, jewel-encrusted reliquaries, and you have the ultimate immersive spiritual experience. But as we move toward the late Middle Ages, art gently begins returning to earth. Society gets a bit more prosperous, and you see this shift away from purely divine subjects towards celebrating human elegance. Just look at the millefleurs, or thousand-flower tapestries. They celebrated the five senses, secular love, and the physical body itself. It was laying the crucial groundwork for a major cultural shift. And that leads perfectly into our final chapter, Part 5, Recovery of Humanity and Renaissance, the 14th Century Awakening. So this long 1,000-year incubation period finally starts wrapping up in 14th century Italy. The focus shifts from the spiritual heavens down to raw, real humanity. A brilliant example is Giotto di Bondone. Using the fresco technique, he completely flipped the script in the Scrovegni chapel. He tossed out those flat, golden, highly symbolic backgrounds we saw earlier and replaced them with deep, realistic spaces and natural blue skies. He literally brought art back down to the natural world. Take a close look at Giotto's Lamentation. Mary and the disciples aren't just stiff, divine symbols anymore. They are real, physical humans who are absolutely devastated by grief. You can see the heavy folds in their clothes, you can sense their physical weight, and most of all, you can feel that agonizing existential cry. It's the complete recovery of human emotion in art, putting our earthly feelings right back at the center of the narrative. So, what does this all mean? After witnessing 1,000 years of incredible evolution, from silent, isolated manuscripts to heavy stone fortresses to soaring walls of light, all the way to raw human emotion, can we really still call this the Dark Ages? I'd argue absolutely not. This wasn't a stagnant void. It was a magnificent creative incubation period that set the stage for the Renaissance. It was the very forge that created the modern world. Thank you for joining me for this explainer today, and as always, keep that curiosity alive.